to our fabulous panel. We have two wonderful guests with us today. We have Ru Zhu right here, who's the author of Newsprints. And we have Nidhi Chanani, our own Bay Area Nidhi Chanani, who's the author of the fabulous Pashmina. And we are just going to have a chat with them. And if you guys have some questions, Nidhi brought some really cute giveaways, so start thinking of your questions now. So I just I'm so excited to have you guys together, first of all, because you both write such wonderful books. But I want to kind of ask you guys how you kind of got started with your art. Like, did you always want to be an artist?
Yeah. Hello? Okay. Yeah, I'd say I did. When I was in third grade especially, the teacher gave us note cards and they were like, write your short-term goals, write your long-term goals. So my short-term goals were like, I'm going to finish my homework. And I did that. I was very successful. And for long-term goals, I wrote, I want to be an artist and I want to be a writer. So in my last year of high school, I was like cleaning out my stuff, and then I found this note card again. And then I saw it, and I was like, yeah, I still want to be those things. And, the rest is history.
Oh, here, hit the button on the top. It might be muted.
Is that on? Okay, that's better. That's kind of awesome that you remember all that stuff, or that you found that in high school. I have trouble remembering anything before high school. But I didn't actually know that this is what I wanted to do. I had zero exposure to anybody who was doing art as a job. Most of the people that I grew up around were engineers, lawyers, doctors, the stereotypical Indian careers. And so it wasn't until my mid-20s, like early 20s, that I started to follow artists that I really liked. And when I was following them, I realized, oh, they don't just like make art for fun. They do it as a job. And so then I kind of did a deep dive and, obsessed over the artists that I liked and tried to figure out how they were doing this. And I, at that point, had already gotten my bachelor's degree in literature and decided to go to art school. And I say this, and most people who see my work don't believe it, but please believe it, I was really bad. I was like in my early 20s, and I was like drawing kind of like funky little characters and robots, a lot of robots. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to do art. And so when I went to art school, I think I was 26, and I dropped out within a year because I learned the basics of what I felt like I needed to learn from art school, because I had already had, a lifetime of education. And so what I was getting from art school was that foundation of light and color, and composition and all the kind of basics of creating a good story within an illustration. And then I dropped out and just did a drawing every day, because I knew that the difference between me and somebody like, let's say, Rue, who knew what you wanted to do from what were you in third grade? Yeah. Was experience, right? I didn't have that experience of drawing all the time, even though I drew, when I could. And so when I dropped out, I just forced myself to create a full color illustration every single day. And I did that for about 3 years.
So art is one thing, but comics are another thing. So how did you know you wanted to do not just art, but what got you into comics?
Well, I had loved comics all through my life. And actually, maybe if I had something that I wrote in third grade, it was that I wanted to be an author. Was that something that you felt like you wanted to be?
Yeah, writer and artist, so both things.
So both things. So I was a pretty active writer. English class and creative writing was my favorite. And so I didn't really realize the combination of it. Again, I feel like I didn't realize a lot of things until I was in my mid-20s. So late bloomer, and that's fine. Whenever you figure it out, I think is fine. So when I was kind of going full force into the art, and then I started reading comics, but I had always thought of comics as your funny, the funnies in the back of the newspaper. And then I started reading graphic novels, and I was like, wait a second, this is the thing that I wanted to do, but different. Like I wanted to be an author, but I never thought that I would be a comics maker because my art was really terrible, and then my art got good and I still had that writing portion. And so the combination of it is, I think, really fun, and it allowed me to use both of the skills that I had been developing. So, yeah.
Rue, how did you know comics were for you and not just pretty pictures?
I don't know, because I think I've just been kind of inundated with comics my entire life. When I was 5, I had this graphic novel sort of adaptation of this really famous Chinese movie, which is like the triumph of Prince Naja over the Dragon King or something like that. Basically, it was just a huge full color graphic novel, and I just kind of started drawing outside of the panels, and I just kind of kept drawing on top of it. So I was like, yeah, this is what happens, and then this is what happens, and I was like, oh, wait, okay, and then that's what happens. But then, as I grew older, I started reading manga, which are Japanese comics, and then, I started making my own with friends. So we'd pass notes around in class, and I draw one panel and then they draw another panel, and then the teacher confiscates it, and then we'd start over. And then when I was in middle school and high school, I started drawing web comics, and this was a fan comic at first. And then I kind of drew this comic until I graduated from high school, and it topped out at 78 pages. And then after that, I started drawing my original webcomic, which was kind of a Western, and I kind of ended that at 200 pages. And then Saint for Rent is my current webcomic, and that's over 400 pages right now and still going. And newsprints, each volume of that is over 200 pages. So it's just I keep on building up comic pages and kind of building up my own confidence with it.
So, Nidhi, you mentioned funnies in the paper, and Rue, you mentioned reading a lot of manga. So, do you guys want to share any of your influences from either from when you were a kid or now? What kind of books you read that kind of shaped your style or idea of what comics should be?
I feel like there's so much that shapes my style now, but growing up is pretty, I guess not limited, but it was definitely from the funnies. But what's interesting is I think about it now, we were a reading family, so we had books always around, and I'm a pretty fast reader, and so when I would finish my books, I would read my mom's books, and so I was reading mysteries and thrillers that were way older than I should have been reading, but the books that got the most traction and that were tattered in our house were the Garfield books. To
this day, just look outside.
Yeah,
we have them on the shelf and they're falling apart.
At the library, right? Yeah, and I mean, our treat was often to go to the bookstore. I would, get books for birthdays and Christmas, and any chance I could, I would ask for a book, and so it would be either Prose or Garfield. So definitely, I think that at least in that young time, it was the funnies. And then later, and now, I mean, I have so many people who I follow and love their work, and I think this is pretty well known in a lot of interviews that I give. Jean Yang. Jean Yang was when I read American Born Chinese, I thought I could do this. I could make something and somebody would actually be able to support it. I could sell something that was an Indian American story. I hadn't seen anything like that before, and seeing that it was out in the world in such a large way gave me the confidence to pursue Pashmina. And there's others. There's, I was just talking about Luke Pearson and Hilda.
So good.
It's so good. And it just became it's not just, but it's been in development for a long time, but it just got released as an animated series on Netflix. And it's adorable. And I think it stays really true to the comic, which is awesome.
They nailed his color palette, which is really
I think he was really involved, which is great. Yeah. Yeah. And there's Hilo. There's so much stuff that I love. What about you? Yeah.
I also like when I came to the U.S. I also started out with newspaper comics. So Garfield, for better for worse, and then Calvin and Hobbes. They had the collected editions in my elementary school library, so I really liked those. And then my friend like introduced me to manga via Sailor Moon. So I was reading Sailor Moon, and then we graduated to Inuyasha, and then I started watching a lot of anime. My big one is Yu-Gi-Oh! Growing up. That's still my jam. Then like just a lot of like different, just a lot of different things that I was interested in. I just kind of like took my favorite parts of it. And that includes things like, characters. Oh, I always like the characters that get killed off easily. Or, so I'm just like, you don't need that character anymore. They're mine. And, they kind of like, just kind of like, stay with me for a long time. And I think that's influenced a lot of how I write characters as well.
And Rudy, are there any like of your contemporaries that you think like you're like big fans of? Like Nidhi mentioned, like Jean Yang and Luke Pearson. Like, is there someone else that you're like, their work?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of people who I used to like follow on DeviantArt, and I followed them to like different social media, like Jade Casey, I believe. She is the artist of Sphere Theory, which is a webcomic that I really like. It's been going on for a few years now, and I still really enjoy it. I also I have friends like Rem, who does Devil's Candy. Just like a lot of people that I follow online now, on Twitter and Instagram, like I'm always like taking inspiration from them.
And what are you guys like currently reading? Like prose or comic book?
I just finished Scott Westerfeld's second Spill Zone. So it's like a sci-fi. It's crazy. It's so good. It's amazing in comics format because there's this, it's called Spill Zone. So there's a zone that there was a chemical spill, and the artist, the artist did an amazing job with the colors, because when they get to the zone, everything becomes kind of fluorescent, and it's not just like the motion and the craziness that's happening in the zone, but it's also really playing with that color, and I have a lot of respect for that. And I feel like before that, I can't remember what I've been reading. I've read Educated, which was a memoir. So, and that was, it's a memoir that was on the Obama, I think, summer list reading. So it's very, it's being read by a lot of people. And it's really amazingly inspiring. It's this woman's journey who was homeschooled, and her journey to go away from her family that was very fundamentalist and get educated. And it's powerful. It's, I don't know, it almost reads like a novel, because I couldn't put it down. It's just like a page turner. You just want to know what happens with her life and how she gets to the point where she's writing this book. So both of those are great.
I just started His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. I've enjoyed her work forever, so I was really excited to get started on that. I don't have a lot of time for prose, so what I've recently started doing is started listening to audiobooks, and I tried Hoopla. I also tried this app called Libby, so
We have both of these at this library.
Nice.
Plug.
Nice. Get like a membership in this library as well.
We're going to get you a card before you leave today.
Thank you. But also, in terms of comics, like I've been reading My Hero Academia, Golden Kamui, so like a lot of manga as always. I read
Good manga too. Really good.
Yeah. I really like historical fiction, but like I also really enjoy the nonfiction, like autobiography and memoirs as well. So I always try to snap up one of those when I find a good one.
I want to go back to something, Nidhi, you mentioned about the use of color in Still Zone and how you found that so inspiring. Now in Pashmina, it's kind of, you go back and forth between like the black and white and color. And then Rue, of course, yours, newsprints, and I think your webcomic, I believe, is all in color, right? So how did you just come to that? Especially because since you're such a manga fan, which is always in black and white. Like, what is your decision-making process, especially Nidhi with Pashmina? Why did you decide to do some in color? And Rue, how about you? Have you ever decided to do a black and white only comic?
Yeah. My first webcomic and my fan comic prior to that, they were all in black and white. But I guess I thought I'd be ambitious and do color. But my main thing when I do color is I tried to emulate the manga style in that the color isn't so rendered that it makes you like stop at each panel. Sometimes it does, as readers have told me, but ideally I want your eye to kind of like flow through it as quickly, as you would if you read a black and white series.
That's really interesting. I didn't know. Is that a theory in manga that's practiced pretty with full color manga? I'm so curious about this.
I don't know about full color manga.
Okay.
Is there there's barely such a thing as full color manga.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some series that are super popular get re-released in full color, like Akira and Yu-Gi-Oh! Recently.
Okay.
But it's interesting because the way that manga artists color their comics is they're not like hyper rendered either for the most part, and it's still like leads your eye very clearly through everything.
That's interesting because my purpose in a lot of the things that I spent way too much time on certain pages and rendering it and making it really vibrant is to make the reader stop, is to make you in that story stop and feel that moment, both because it's taking up, let's say, a single page or a double page spread. And I think that pacing, listen, everybody's going to read comics differently. And maybe even though I put all that effort into rendering a full color page or spread, it's not going to make you stop. You're just going to keep like reading because you want to know what's happening next, which is also effective and a good thing. But it's interesting to hear about this whole, like this, like kind of blowing my mind, is how color is used in a way to augment the art, but not interfere with the reading, which is kind of amazing. But so in Pashmina, I intentionally use color to add another layer to the narrative, which is that when she's in reality, she is in black and white. And when she puts on the Pashmina, she goes into full color, which is the fantasy. And in the next book that I'm working on, I haven't landed yet on how I want to utilize color, but I keep wanting to challenge myself, do something different. So my next book is called Jukebox, and it's about two Muslim American cousins who find a jukebox that takes them back in time. So again, we have very, not similar, but similar structurally to Pashmina, where you have real world settings and then fantasy or history settings. And so different than Pashmina, but I want the real world to be real world color. But I'm not quite sure how I want to do the history. I'm either going to do it tonal or I'm going to do it as spot color. So everything else has a tone except the characters are in full color. So I'm going to play with a bunch of different samples and see and get some opinions on what works. But I think color is a really powerful tool in storytelling because it can layer up your narrative. It gives visual, not breaks, but different visual information to the reader, and it breaks it up too, right? So you have maybe 30 pages of black and white, and then all of a sudden you're in color. Your brain will respond to that differently, and it engages you differently. And there are things that you can do in color with color that you can't do with black and white. And so I like to explore all of those things and those nuances and layer the story with the use of what it is, which is a visual medium.
Well, while we're talking about color, because we're kind of getting into the nitty gritty, which I'm actually like super excited about. But yeah, we talked about color. I think also like panel flow is a big one, right? For like whether you're reading straight through like you do with a manga, you read it really fast, or you want to stop at each panel. What is your guys' process for doing your comics? What is your start to finish, and how do you make those decisions? start with Rue.
Okay. I like to do an outline first, and then script, thumbnails, the drawing art, and then I usually put lettering somewhere in between there and coloring, and then you have inking and then coloring. It's pretty straightforward. I think you just have to do it like 200 times a book.
Wow, that's amazing. I wish that my process was straightforward and that I could keep repeating it over and over. All I do is continually change things and challenge myself, and then I get really tired and wonder why I'm making my life harder. But Pashmina was a process of doing the manuscript first. So I wrote the entire book first. Then I went to thumbnails. So I was combining these loose drawings with the text. And it changed so much from manuscript to thumbnail. I realized that the next book that I was going to do, I was just going to throw away that manuscript. And maybe it's because my scripting is terrible and yours is probably way better.
If it makes you feel better, the newsprints that came out is like the third draft.
Okay.
Like my editor, like I had the initial draft that I sent to my editor, all thumbnailed and everything. And then I scrapped like 60% of that. Whoa. And then it was a new draft, and then that one was better accepted by my editor. So, I kept like 80% of that.
Okay.
And then I just kind of kept going from there. Book 2 had fewer drafts.
Okay.
Good. But with webcomics as well, we end up sort of update like twice a week. We're just constantly like churning out comic pages, so it's a little closer to what you do as well.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I like try to find where the arcs are, because I know it's going to be like 6 years before I reach that part. By how slow webcomics go.
I think it's funny that you call it slow when you're like updating twice a week and like producing. How many comic pages do you produce a week?
Like for webcomics, when I'm updating, it's 2 pages a week. I know people who do 5, and they do like fully rendered comics. That's their full-time job, and it's super envious. I'm super envious of that.
That's still a lot of work, especially because there's a whole process, right, of creating like a full page, right? So you have to like either write the script or thumbnail it and then take it to final. And each iteration, I feel like it's natural to edit, right? You're gonna make it tighter, you're gonna make it stronger. So with Pashmina, I did manuscript, I did the thumbnails, it changed pretty dramatically. My joke is that every page you see in Pashmina has been redrawn 4 times because it was my learning experience. I had never done anything that long before, unlike Rue, which I wish I could just like borrow some of your experience. But I got to this place where I wanted to make a comic, and the longest thing I had done at that point was probably like 5 or 6 pages. So to go from 5 or 6 pages to 167, that's a huge jump, and I knew there were going to be challenges. I didn't know how challenging it was going to be, because I think the thing about doing illustration, even if you're doing picture book illustration, is just on the art side, not the story side, the strength of comics in the drawing muscles that it makes you exercise are drawing those in-between moments. Right? Even picture book illustration, you're still drawing those kind of like big moments, and they tend to be happy, or a lot of poses and a lot of facial expressions that you're pretty comfortable drawing, because when you get to a certain place with your art, drawing somebody happy is like it's easy, right? But it's like, how do you draw somebody in an in-between pose, like just paying attention or putting a fork up to their mouth, like all of those things are really challenging when you've never had to draw that before. And so that was a big jump, and figuring out how to convey emotion and how to pace and reveal the story slowly. And now with my new book, I've skipped the manuscript entirely and gone straight to thumbnails. And I just met with my editor last week, and I was really nervous because nobody else has seen the manuscript. I'm about 100 pages in. And so I was like ready to have that same experience of Pashmina, of showing it to him and being like, okay, back to the drawing board. I'm gonna draw this like 100 pages all over again. And he was like, I have nothing to say. I just want to see where this is going.
Just keep crushing it.
Yeah, and he was just like, it's so different from, the first book, right? Like, I can tell you some small tweaks, which I will, but you know what you're doing. And he was like, you've had other people look at this too. And I was like, no, you're the first person. I'm like too afraid to show it to anybody else. And he was like, I thought somebody else had given you feedback. And I was like, no, it's just me. So I feel like there's a certain amount you probably feel the same way, where you trust yourself more and your storytelling muscles and your paneling and everything is getting stronger.
I don't know, but I don't know about that. But I definitely know that different artists have different takes on how they begin it, because I know some people who are like, yeah, I only do thumbnails, just like what you did for your second book. I don't even have a script.
Yep.
For me, like, I tried that, but I always kept scrapping the thumbnails. Because for me, I'll just because I grew up with manga, I end up taking up too much, time on the little moments.
Okay.
I watched so much Miyazaki growing up, so it's just like, yeah, this moment is really important. This moment where there's just like walking down the stairs.
Yeah.
But so for me, I use the script to kind of like keep myself at pace for however many pages that I'm allotted in a certain project.
Okay. Interesting.
So both of you guys write for kind of a range of ages. Like Pashmina and Newsprints are both kind of like in that middle grade category. And then Nidhi, you have some picture books. Rue, you have Saint for Rent. You guys write for a variety. But middle grade obviously is booming for comics right now. You guys are a part of this huge middle grade movement. How did you fall into writing for that age group? And how do you think it is different than writing for other ages? Let's start with you.
Okay. Well, for me, I just kind of have stories, and then I kind of decide, yeah, I guess that's the target audience. For newsprints, it went through several iterations, actually. It started out as sort of a project in my freshman year of college, and it was just for a kid's CD demo. That there was no game. I just made the CD cover. And then I just kind of revisited the characters every other project until I kind of had enough concepts and world building and character development to really make a story. At that time, my professor took us on a never again repeated field trip to New York, where he introduced us to editors that he knew. And my editor at Scholastic, she liked the concept stuff that I had for newsprints, and she asked for more, and we kept in contact until we started working together for newsprints. And for newsprints, it was definitely there were some darker versions of the story. There were some other versions of the story. I put it all together in an art book. But ultimately, I'm really glad that that's where it came out to be. Middle grade.
Yeah, I start with a story. So I think it's really the marketing team that decides what age. Honestly, I just, Priyanka is 17 in Pashmina, but the book is being read at 7 years old. And a 7-year-old is going to get different things out of Pashmina than a teenager is going to get different things out of Pashmina, and that's fine. And so I think that it's interesting to talk about middle grade and YA and all these kind of categories, and I think that those are more of your gatekeeper categories. So it's the librarians, the teachers, the parents, and they need to know. But kids, they'll just respond to cover, they'll flip through it, and if they like it, they'll pick it up. But it's kind of irrelevant at the reader level. And so I write for what I want to tell, how I want to tell that story, and then the marketers figure out the rest.
This is middle grade.
Although I do have to say that in Jukebox, I actually kind of polled some family members who are 10 to 12 and asked them if their parents would be upset if I put the word hell in the book. And my 12-year-old nephew was like, well, do you need it in there? And I was like, point taken, because it's just like you kind of realize that what's normal to you or what doesn't seem like a swear word to you. Like I'm actually pretty clean in my language, but I felt like the moment called for something a little more powerful, and we had a conversation about it, and it opened up my mind to think like, no, actually I don't need it. I could figure something else out to replace that and then invite more people in. So I think there's some things about language that I definitely think about when I think about the audience, but beyond that, I'm really just thinking about the story.
And I want to leave time for questions. So let's talk really quick about the future for you guys. So you guys both have books coming out soon. Rue, you have Endgames. Can you tell us anything about it?
Oh yeah, Endgames is a sequel to Newsprints. It comes out in January, and in Endgames, Blue goes to the capital city of Altalis to rescue her friend Crow, but things go not according to plan, and she is kidnapped by twins from the enemy country.
That's awesome. So I have a picture book coming out next year called I Will Be Fierce. My Disney comic Jasmine's New Pet came out just this week, and my Project Jukebox will be out in 2021, and I have a couple unannounced things that will happen in between that time. So you're busy. I have books happening from now until 2021, and I think after New York, I'm going to sign up more stuff, so that might just extend out until 2024.
So we are all very excited for you guys' new books. Obviously, this library will have them, so you guys look forward. But bigger picture, what are you guys excited about in comics for the future? Like, what is like a trend that's like exciting you, or something you are not seeing that you want to see more of? Like, what are you looking forward to?
I'm just looking forward to seeing how the new audience will turn out, like what kind of people they'll be. All the middle grade readers and the young readers. I'm really excited to see like what they grow up into, and like if they revisit my stories again, it's like what will they bring to it? What kind of new perspectives they'll bring to it, that they'll be like, oh, I'm reading this differently now that I'm an adult.
Yeah, I think that you guys are like raising a whole new generation of comics readers. No, for real. Like, especially like girls who are reading these original graphic novels like in their schools and in libraries, whereas they might have not read like superhero comics or something. And so I am also looking forward to seeing these kids.
I just have a signing at 12:30, right?
I'm
like, do I?
So I know the schedule. I got it down, guys. Don't worry. So Nidhi is signing at 12:30. She's signing her book Pashmina, and you guys can buy a copy over there and get it signed right around the corner at the very beginning of Artist Alley. And Rue is going to be drawing for us upstairs on the second floor. She's going to be doing a live drawing demo, which like I can't go to because I'm stuck in this room. But it's going to be amazing, and you guys should go see her draw. And then she will be, and that's at 1:30, and she will be signing her book Newsprints up there at 2:30 after that. And again, you guys can purchase the book there and get a copy signed. I just got my copy signed before this panel, so do it. Anyone else want a cute notebook? Okay, well, thank you guys so much for coming to this panel. Thank you so much, Nidhi, and thank you so much, Rue. And both of these ladies also have tables out in our artist alley, so make sure to go by, say hi to them, and pick up some of their really cute art and some of their books.
Thanks for coming, everyone.